Welcome back to Roundtail Restoration, everybody. My name's Chris. Next to me here is the overdrive transmission that I'm rebuilding for my 1964 Triumph TR4. As you can see, it's all together. Permatex aviation former gasket sealing stuff up. The speedometer thing, gear thing is in. The overdrive lockout switches are in. And we got it back together. So final assembly coming up next. Thanks for watching. Let's get it sorted. More reassembly of the overdrive here. Just going to get some low-hanging fruit. First off, I'm going to put in the oil filter here, and it's just a mesh. I've cleaned all this stuff already. What is kind of interesting about it is these three washers here are actually magnetic, and they absorb the oil. So when I took this all apart, it was nasty and gunky. It's got a little placement pin in here, and it's just a brass cap. These things are not cheap anymore, so if you can save this stuff, you want to save it. New gasket, you can get those. Those are readily available. So you put the gasket on, obviously, the three magnetic washers. I did not buy new ones because, you know, magnetism usually lasts for quite a while. So you put that basket in that little pin there, and that just fits in like so. Screws on. And if you see here, these have got those notches in here. You can use a C-wrench, and I have one of those. I'll go grab that real quick and snug this up. Going into aluminum, you don't need to over tighten it, just needs to snug up. Hand tight's probably good enough, but I did buy the C-wrench for this, so I might as well use it. You can get these in various sizes. This one here is probably should have gotten a little bit bigger. This is 1 1/4 to 3. It works, kind of. All right, so that's snugged up there. We got that done. So I said I was going to do some low-hanging fruit on the overdrive unit, and it turns out I ran out of low-hanging fruit. I don't have stuff quite as cleaned up as I thought I did. So next up, I'm going to mount the base plate and the transition plate, whatever you want to call it, the plate that essentially allows you to go from a regular transmission. Right now, I would just put on the extension unit if I had a non-overdrive transmission, but now I need to put the transition plate or base plate that goes on, this guy right here, that goes on and essentially mates the overdrive unit with the transmission unit. So there's a gasket that goes on the transmission unit, then that plate gets dropped on and that gets bolted down, and then you get another gasket that'll go on when I go to mount the overdrive unit itself. So we're going to paint up this area. I've already cleaned it all off, got it scrubbed down with a scouring pad, cleaned up with some wax and grease remover so I didn't have any remaining debris on there. And we'll go ahead and use my aviation former gasket, which is pretty thick because it's freezing in here. Get this painted up, as I always do, with a coat on the surface and a coat on the gasket. And we'll get this guy down there. So I won't bore you with this, but I will come back when it's time for me to bolt it up because I want to show you some stuff. Got the gasket all painted up and everything all painted up, and now that's down there. I haven't bolted anything in yet. So there's two designs with this up here. The earlier designs used bolts with lock wire. The later designs use bolts with essentially just a lock washer. And the bolts that I took out of here did not have lock wire, but they had flat washers, and they had a little plastic ball or like plug inside the nut. And I've seen these before, and it essentially is just to help it not work out. So I'm not going to use the flat washers. I will use the lock washers, but I'm going to retain these with the plastic. And I'm also going to put a drop of EB, or not EB, but Thread Locker Blue on there just to be sure. And I figure that'll give me more than enough security that this won't come apart. And there's no spec for these as far as torque goes. So I'm just going to torque it to 20 foot-pounds from the recommendation from Greasy Hands Garage. All right, got them all snug. We'll go up to 10 pounds and then to 20 pounds. Just in case the 20 doesn't feel good. And I am kind of doing it in the opposite. I'm not so sure that it matters, but make sure this thing goes on flat. Going to 15 instead of 20. All right, so that's all those. So now essentially what's up next is this surface is all going to get a gasket and the overdrive. And now pretty much the only thing left is to get the springs in, which I just got cleaned up, and to mount the overdrive to this puppy right here. So here's where it's going to start to get a little tricky. I've already made one mistake. You see that I pulled out the oil filter cap, and the reason that is because you've got to essentially pinch down the oil pump housing where it interacts with the eccentric cam. And the workshop manual has you use like screwdrivers and stuff like that, and that just doesn't look like any fun to me. So I'm going to be using this method here where it uses lock wire. But first what we're going to look at is the springs themselves. So there are 8 springs in here, and they're pretty close to each other, but 4 of them are a little bit shorter and a little bit thinner in wire diameter than the other 4. So mine all look pretty good. There's a little bit of pitting on one of them, but the rest of them look really good. They cleaned up well. The spacing between all the spring coils are all about the same. They don't look bent and they feel like they're, they feel springy, that's a technical term. So these are going to go in now. And the way that they go in, and again, the Greasy Hands Garage talks about this and how to measure and look at those springs and everything like that. And essentially, the way they go in is the shorter springs are installed on the inner positions, and then the longer springs are installed on the outer position. So I'll zoom in into the top of the overdrive here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Also, real quick, just to point out, the longer springs are the heavier springs. So looking in at the case here, you've got these 8 spikes sticking out, and those are on the brake ring. Essentially not the brake ring, but the sliding clutch. And the 2 outer ones, like I had mentioned, are going to be the longer ones. Let me double check that real quick. Yeah, so the outer ones are going to be the longer springs, and the shorter springs are on the inner positions. So again, the longer springs are the ones that are a little bit heavier and a little bit heavier, and obviously a little bit longer. And they're only about a 1/4 inch difference, so it's pretty subtle, but it's easier to me looking at them. It's easier to see the difference in the wire gauge. So there's those springs. So obviously these are going to need to get compressed and all of that, and that's what is going to be tricky. The other thing I'd mentioned, the fuel pump here, the oil pump, that's got a heavy duty spring. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this wire, and the reason that I pulled this cap off is because I can sneak the wire through a hole in here and come up and into and grab that so that I'm not going to interfere with the gasket as I go to put this down. Now, before I get it all the way down, I'm going to want to pull this wire out and make sure that I don't lose it in here or anything like that. But for now, we're going to try to snake this through and see if I can get this figured out here. All right, so through that hole here, let me zoom out a little bit and move the camera and show you. There's a hole that penetrates all the way into the case, going through on that way, and then the other side of the wire, I'm staying inside the case, but I'm just coming out the accumulator hole where I don't have the accumulator in yet, so maybe that's another good reason not to put this thing all back together yet. So essentially what we're going to do now is take this wire and pull down that plunger, and then twist the wire up so it holds that plunger down, and that was not too difficult. I want to get a little bit tighter, so I'm going to go grab a pair of pliers real quick and start twisting this so it just draws that wire, and then I'll show you back how far down the plunger is. And not real easy to see, but there's space in between both the wire and that plunger there. And as I mentioned, here's your eccentric cam. We're going to set that up so it's at its lowest point, and that gives me more than enough clearance there to be able to slide that shaft through. So we'll get that on there. I might have to rotate this to get that lined up. So now that's pretty much, with the exception of the gasket prep, that's pretty much the prep work that I have to do. So there's a couple different ways it says you can do it. One, you can lay it flat, put the 2 pieces together, and these extra long bolts here are what helps you draw and compress these springs down. The other thing that it says is you can take the gearbox itself and invert it and land it this way. The problems with that are this eccentric cam is going to want to go flying down, obviously, and I think I want to try it just vertically first or horizontally first instead of trying that. But I got to get the gasket all prepped up, and again, I'm not going to bore you with prepping the gasket, so let me get that ready and do all that and make that mess, and then I'll get to trying to get these pairs mated together. So I've got the gasket all prepped up, and I have the concentric pump lined up so it's at its smallest spot, pointing down towards the oil pump, so I don't get any interference there. Lay this guy down. Then we're going to lay the transmission down and hopefully meet the two together. So that the trick or the concern here, one is the springs. There's little nubs on the plate that you get all the springs lined up on so that you keep them in alignment. Then they go flying all over the place. Two, you want to keep the overdrive disengaged is what it says, so that the splines on the inside, if you remember the dummy shaft I'd used to make sure that the splines remained aligned on the inside so that you didn't get that out, because if it's not aligned, then these splines here from the main shaft are not going to go in. I'm going to take the whole thing apart again. So obviously don't want to do that, especially now that I've got it nice and pretty and gasketed up. So we're going to go ahead and tip this down, try to mate them together, and cry if it doesn't work, I guess. Maybe use some wood here to help me hold stuff up. And I'm sure I'm going to be blocking this shot, so you probably don't want to watch and learn from this one anyway. All right, so I've got it kind of lined up here. Might be able to lift it now. If I lift it so the overdrive is pointing up, I'm afraid I'm going to lose control of my springs, though I should have it far enough in now that that's not going to be a concern. So I think I'll try that. Here we go. Oh, that thing's heavy. All right, that fell in. Check my springs. Hopefully it doesn't fall on my fingers and hurt. So the springs look all lined up. The wire is about to slip off the oil pump. Not sure if I can do anything about that. I think that wire's interfering with these springs too. So the wire's interfering with the springs on this plunger, and that's going to end up messing me up. Now let's see. These long bolts are to bring this stuff together. So let's see if that'll help me here. So I let that spring go now, that's it. It's going to pop out and then I'm going to be in trouble. So let me get a wrench here and we'll start seeing if I can draw it in. All right, all the bolts are lining up, coming together. Doesn't seem to be fighting me. Still got a ways on that pump though. I believe now I'm actually compressing the springs, which is what's giving me the resistance. So I'm hoping I'm beyond the chance that I might not have the splines lined up. Still not ready for the pump yet, but it's close. Actually, looks like it's a lot easier to look at the pump through here. I don't think I'm there yet. Must have to wait until the very end. And now where I am at on this side. So the pump has got to come out now. Just hope I can get it out. And I don't think I'm going to be able to. The pump's working. I can see it. I got this big, huge piece of wire in there. Let me play around in there. I know that probably wasn't very exciting motion picture there, but let me play around in there and see if I can get this thing out of here. So the next thing to install here is the oil relief valve that's buried inside the where the oil accumulator resides. So that's essentially just a spring-loaded ball and plunger. So I have there's a nut that goes in there, and a little itty-bitty ball that you can barely see, and a copper washer, which I got new. So we'll just put that together. Not much to it here. So the order in which this goes in, and you can look this up in the workshop manual, is you put the ball in, and then the plunger, and then the spring, and then the bolt. So I'll zoom out a little bit here, actually. Let me put it together. So zoom out a little bit just so you can see this a little bit better. So you got a little plunger here. So the ball is going to go in first, and then the plunger, and then the spring. So the spring and the plunger are trying to fit together. So we'll go ahead and get the cap and the new copper washer in there. And I think what I'm going to do, just to kind of making me nervous doing it like this, I'm going to lay it down so I can go straight in. Might be a little easier to show you too, by the way. And this thing is considerably more heavy now and a little bit more unwieldy with the overdrive on it. So just be aware of that. It's not, can't throw this thing around like you used to be able to. All right, unfortunately I can't get quite a good angle on that. But again, the ball. So we'll drop the ball in. I'm going to get a pair of needle nose pliers. Drop the ball in. Then the spring and plunger. Copper washer and the cap. And the cap is hollow. You can see that, so that helps. You don't have to worry about aligning the spring and everything. You'll get it once you get it going. It'll kind of self-align there. And that is a 7/16. So there is that done. And the next up is the accumulator, which will come around for here. The accumulator goes right in here. It's the same kind of setup, a little bit different parts here. So this, we've got the accumulator itself. We'll drop that in. It goes down in there. And then this one also has a ball. That's next, but the ball's a little bit bigger. Again, I got a new ball for this guy. The ball goes in there. Then the plunger facing big end down, and the spring. And then of course, a new copper washer. All right, so that's going to be a problem. So the problem here is that this is recessed, this spot, and this copper washer is just a hair too big for the recess. So I don't want to use the old one, so I'm going to have to go and just barely grind that off. Otherwise I'm going to crush the washer and it's not going to do me any good. So those washers, by the way, not calling them out negatively, but those are from Rimmers. So something to watch out for. So let me take care of that, and then we'll be back. Got that copper washer file down and got that thing inserted. So that's all good to go. So now I've got two gaskets up here in the front, the transition housing, and then there's a little cap that goes over the counter shaft. So those are gasketed, so I'll use the Permatex and gasket that guy up and bolt it in. I unfortunately forgot that those were copper washers on there, so I have the old ones. I'm going to reuse them for now to let the gasket get all set up and all that kind of stuff so I don't hold up. I haven't ordered any of that stuff. But I'll come back later and do a 1-for-1 bolt swap so I don't break the gasket, and then swap the copper washers out for new ones when I get them. So that's I'm not going to show you that. That's obviously real quick and easy. Just like I said, gasketing this thing up. And then we'll be getting close here to putting some oil in it. And you guys are probably not going to like my my choice of oil, but it is only for testing. Next up here is to install the accumulator piston and the springs and all that kind of stuff. And just essentially a big old piston here with some piston rings on it, some metal piston rings that'll get compressed, essentially going in just as it came out. So that'll go in. It's lubricated up fine enough. So that just slides in there. And then the springs. So it's a double, kind of a double spring there. Big heavy duty things, obviously. Now the cover is going to go on, and there's a gasket in here. And I didn't realize this taken apart, and I guess in hindsight I kind of got lucky that I didn't break anything. So you can't, the spring obviously sticks out a distance, so you have to get the longer bolts, as I throw one, the longer bolts here to help you get started so that you can draw that spring in so it doesn't come out crooked. And when you take it off, you want to do it the same way, where you undo the bolts and let it come out slowly so that you don't end up putting a lot of torque on this thing and snapping at these. You can get these covers, I guess, but they ain't cheap. We'll go ahead now, get the gasket all ready to go. Here, I'll pull the spring back out so it's not in my way. Get the gasket all fit up, ready to go. There's also an O-ring right here, so that goes in there, goes around the operating lever, and I got a new O-ring. So we'll get that in, and then we'll get this puppy installed, and that's pretty close to being done. As you can see, I've got the gasket sealer on there. So now we'll stick the big springs in. Get this orientated right. And again, I got that O-ring, and we'll get the long bolts going. And I'm going to try to keep these as even as I tighten it as I can so that I don't mess anything up here and put an undue strain. Again, this is just aluminum. Don't want to tweak it so you don't snap it. Now I can start to get the bolts over here, if I can find where I did with my bolts. Here they go. And these both get lock washers as well, so I need lock washers real quick. Got that set up. Now the solenoid's going to bolt up here, but first you've got some adjustment stuff. So this arm is going to go into here, and then that, when the solenoid goes, that's what triggers that, and then it moves that operating arm. There's a little collar that goes on there as a spacer, and that goes on there. And then you got nut and bolt to tighten her up. All right, not going to worry about getting that tight right now because that's going to need adjustment. The other thing is from the bottom here, you have like a bottoming out adjustment screw. So that's just going to limit the travel of the solenoid. Again, I'm not going to worry about adjusting this right now because I'm going to have to do it more later. And then you got the little nut on there, that's a lock nut. And then two little screws up here that are going to hold the solenoid on. Next up is going to be to get the top cover on. I'm not going to put this gasket down with any gasket sealant, any real stuff. I'm just going to use a thin coat of oil for the paper just to give it some adhesion. I expect oil to spray into that top cover gasket. I think that's how it gets kind of lubricated, but it's not going to have weight sitting on it. It's not going to really be any pressure behind it. So I don't really expect it to leak, and it would just make it that much more difficult the next time, probably now while I'm troubleshooting this thing, that I may have to take that apart again. So we're not going to worry about that. Now, I had mentioned that I was going to have a potentially arguable choice for my oil, and I just went out and bought bar and chain oil, 30 weight, essentially without any additives or anything like that. This is going to only be for testing purposes. I haven't decided on the final oil that I'm going to use, whether it's going to be Penn oil, Gear oil, or I've seen the MT90 stuff that people use. I've also read that people use 20W50, whatever. Again, this is just going to be for testing. So we're going to pour 2 quarts of oil into here. That should be enough. And then spin the thing around, the oil pump in the overdrive, all this stuff that the Greasy Hands Garage talks about, getting the air out of the system and all that kind of stuff, and things that you can do to do that. And I didn't do any of that. Hopefully I won't come to regret it and not being able to get this thing primed, but I'm not too concerned with it. So we're going to go ahead and dump 2 of these quarts in there and then put the top cover on, and then essentially it'll be complete at that point. And then I've got to figure out how I'm going to rig it up to be able to rotate it with a motor that I've got, hopefully, that is strong enough to turn this thing and fast enough. And I can see the drain plug over here, the fill plug. I can see that from the inside, so no matter what, I'm not going to put more than that amount of oil in. The overdrive's got to fill with oil, and I don't know if it's doing it right now. I don't know. Could be. All right, so that looks like it's about even. Not quite 2 quarts. And the workshop manual says almost exactly 2 quarts with an overdrive. So I assume that means the overdrive's not filling up yet. So the only thing you got to watch for when putting the top cover down is the reverse. Make sure the reverse lines up, and then obviously you're really not going to be able to get it in if the other selector forks don't line up. But you can put it in without having a reverse line up. So that should go mostly all the way to the back. And there you go. So we'll get all the bolts started, and then we'll check reverse real quick, make sure it actually goes in. All right, that's it. So now we got these 2 switches up here. We'll get those in real quick, and then that should be about it. Now I did have to get 1 new solenoid switch. The funny, out of the 2 original ones, I rebuilt one that didn't work and got it to work, and then the other one that did work has a little broken rivet on it, so I'm leery to use that. These also have little like paper gaskets on them. I bought extras, so we'll put those in. All right, not going to tighten them down too much, no reason to really grunk on it. All right, so in the interest of full disclosure, I have done this already, and I had a little bit better of an idea with this setup here, so I came back at it and show you more clearly. So obviously I got a speedometer set up here. Now it's sitting at about 16, 18 miles an hour because I haven't finished the refurb on it yet. It's just kind of thrown back together. So I got that hooked up to the speedo drive on the transmission. I have a Milwaukee cordless 18-volt drill on the input shaft chucked up. Nothing else that, believe it or not, it is strong enough to spin this around at a high enough RPM to get the overdrive to engage. Now that the garage has been pretty cold the last couple of days, so the oil's pretty thick, and it is 30 weight like I had mentioned earlier, so it's taking a little bit and the batteries are going pretty fast. But what I'm going to do is I'll spin this up clockwise. You'll be able to watch the RPM to get, or excuse me, the speed to get whatever the drill is able to get it to, and then I'll engage the overdrive and you should see the speed come up or down, however it ends up working. I'm not quite sure how the drill is going to respond, but you should see a change is what we're keying in on. Now I've got an oil leak here because of the copper washer that I can't source, and you'll see the pressure come up, and we're looking for about 360 pounds or so, and that's been successful, but you'll see it come up to about that, and then you might see it relieve a little bit. So right here at the 12 o'clock is 300, and right over here is 400. I know it's kind of hard to see. So I've got the batteries fully charged up. We're going to get this thing spinning and then get the pressure built up, and once it gets to about 360 pounds or so, I'll let it go for another couple seconds, and then I'll engage the overdrive using this lever right here. On the other side of the gearbox from this lever is where the solenoid is, and I've tested it electrically, but that's going to be for a different video. So essentially I'm going to manual actuate it, and you should be able to see this thing kick in and see the speed change like I had mentioned. So hopefully the drill's got enough oomph to get this thing spinning, to at least show you the operations and the goings on here, and we'll get to going. Oh, one more important safety tip. You want to spin this guy clockwise, just like you would from the engine. You don't want to spin it in reverse, because I don't have a reverse gear lockout here, because everything's mechanical, so there's no electrical checks at all. So there's I have no ability to prevent me from maloperation. So you got to make sure you spin it clockwise. You spin it counterclockwise and you gauge that overdrive, and you could wipe through that unidirectional clutch that I had mentioned in my previous videos. So that obviously you don't want to happen. So get this going clockwise as you're looking at the input shaft, and we'll spin that up, and then we'll engage the overdrive and see what happens. So we're looking at about 36 miles an hour or so. Pressure's coming up again. I'm going to wait until it gets up. And the battery's already starting to struggle. Hopefully we'll get up here and pressure a little bit. There we go, and that just came down. So again, we're about 34 now. We'll engage. Yep, and engage, and you see it going at about 40 miles an hour. And you can hear the speed of the drill change. We'll disengage it, and it drops back down to about 34. So that tells me that the overdrive is operating properly. Again, go no-go test, not any quality there, but at least I know that it's working. So this pressure will hold on. I think I mentioned earlier in my video that I don't think it's quite right, and if I did mention that or didn't edit it out, it's fine. It just takes a while to bleed off, but because I got this leak here, what you can do is you can actuate the overdrive here and just slowly kind of let that bleed away. So we'll do that, get this gauge back out of here, get this thing buttoned up, and test its sat. So that's good. Gotta love it. Oh, one more thing. Obviously you need to be in gear when you do this. Otherwise there's nothing for the overdrive to engage. So as I mentioned, the last thing is going to be get the clutch operating shaft on. Don't forget the spring here. I got a new spring. That's going to go on first. There are Zerk fittings on either ends of these. The one Zerk fitting that's going to go through the entire case, that's got to come off. And the actuating arm is going to end up down, so that when you put the actual fork in, right, your bolt, retaining bolt's going to come from the bottom there. Obviously you want to get your orientation right now, because I drilled the hole and all that kind of stuff. It's hard for me to mess it up. And even if you did get it backwards, once you got in there to try to get everything lined up, it wouldn't work. So we'll get this guy going in, get the clutch fork on there, and then it should be coming all the way through. Giving me a little bit of pain on this side. I don't know if that bushing might have gotten pinched a little bit. Take off this other Zerk fitting and get my mallet, kind of tap on that side a little bit. That did it. And then obviously you got to line up your holes here. So I need to go in a little bit more. And that looks like about right. And get this guy started. I'm trying to keep it loose. So obviously I don't have a bearing on here. So here's the bearing, and I'm just going to run over to the press real quick and press that down, and I'll be right back. Got that bearing pressed on, no problem. It's not that tight of a fit. So now as you slide the bearing in the sleeve, you want to engage it, the two little fingers of the fork to engage it. And there you go. So now that's good. And the little guy in the front. And that's going to take me a while to tighten that up. And then put the Zerk fittings back on. So that's good. I'll tighten that bolt up, and then I'll show you over here real quick. If you remember, it's got that little bolt that comes through here, the capture bolt, and you just want to get that guy in there. If you lined everything up right, it should pretty much go right in. All right, so there's that. And then make sure it's still nice and easy moment there, that it screwing that thing down didn't mess that up. And I won't bore you tightening this thing all the way down, because that's going to take a little while. We'll go ahead and get those tightened up, And then I got that lock wire to do yet, and I don't even have any lock wire, so I got to figure that out. But that pretty much will be transmission done. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. Well, really happy. Really, really happy with how that went. I'm sure there's kinks to work out and everything like that, especially electrical, but I know from a mechanical side, at least she is solid. So thanks for sticking around for these long videos. Still a little bit more to come, but that's all for now. So thanks for watching. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.